At the 2022 Valencian Grand Prix, Pecco Bagnaia, or Pecco as he is nicknamed, would make history by becoming the first Ducati rider since Casey Stoner to win the MotoGP World title and become the first Premier Class champion to come out of the VR46 Academy that was set up in 2014. It would also see Pecco become the first Italian champion since Valentino Rossi in 2009, however for a while it didn't appear like this scenario would happen due to a number of factors that plagued Pecco during the first half of the season. This is the story of Pecco Bagnaia's incredible comeback. But before we get into the year in question, we need to go back to the previous season. After a shaky 2020 season, which saw Bagnaia bottle the win at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix in Misano, Pecco would move over to the Ducati factory team from 2021 along with his 2020 teammate Jack Miller, where it is fair to say that people at the time rated Jack higher than Pecco, given he'd come off the back of an impressive 2020 season, being unlucky not to grab a win that year. So with that in mind, many people expected that if Ducati were in a position to challenge for the title in 2021, Miller would be the one to deliver. But when the 2021 season came around, it became clear that this wasn't the case, with Pecco clearly being the better of the two, even if he did have a tendency to make mistakes. By the time the first half of the season came to a close, Ducati only had 2 wins to their name, although none of which came from Pecco, instead coming from Miller, who took back-to-back wins at Jerez and a rain-affected Le Mans. But once the Aragon Grand Prix came around, things started to change, as in that race, Pecco withstood immense pressure from future teammate Marc Marquez to come through to take his first ever Premier Class win after failing on previous occasions. This would then lead to a good run of form for Pecco, as although he would end up losing the title to Fabio Quartararo after once again crashing out from the lead at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, Pecco would end up winning 3 of the remaining 5 races, ensuring that Ducati would win both the team's title and the manufacturer's title. Many people, including myself, expected Pecco to be the favourite to win the title in 2022, as it felt like a shift had happened towards the end of the season, which saw the advantage swing from Yamaha to Ducati. But this prediction would end up being tested, as 2022 would not start off great for Pecco. At the Qatar Grand Prix, Ducati would qualify first and second on the front row, but it wouldn't come courtesy of the factory riders, as Jorge Martin on the Pramac would instead take pole position by just over a tenth ahead of the Gresini of Enea Bastianini, who was running a year-old Ducati in what was Gresini's first race with Ducati after losing factory support from Aprilia. Pecco, meanwhile, was nowhere near and qualified down in 9th, 2 tenths behind teammate Miller, who was up in 4th. And things would get worse in the race, as on lap 11, Pecco would end up crashing out of the race after a collision with future title rival Jorge Martin at turn 1, also ending his race in the process after a bad start. Things wouldn't get better at the next race at Mandalika, as Pecco would end up finishing down in a dreadful 15th due to not being comfortable in the wet conditions, which nearly saw him fall off his bike on the approach to turn 1. 2 5th place finishes would follow at Rio Hondo and Kota, before Pecco would finish a disappointing 8th in Portimao in a race that saw his title rival Quartararo grab his first win of the season, following a tricky start to the season as well. Then came the Spanish Grand Prix at Jerez, and after a tricky start to the season for Ducati, the Italian manufacturer was finally able to understand their bike, as after grabbing pole position in qualifying, Pecco, despite immense pressure from Quartararo, would finally get some good luck and come through to take his first win of the season, grabbing the factory team's first win of the year as well, in a season which saw Gresini, one of their satellite teams, grab 2 wins in the first 6 races with Enea Bastianini, which in turn put him on the radar for a factory ride in 2023. Pecco would jump to 5th in the standings, but was a massive 33 points behind Quartararo, who led by 7 points ahead of the Aprilia of Aleix Espargaro, who would grab his first ever MotoGP win 3 races prior in Argentina. Pecco would then lose ground to Fabio at the next race at Le Mans, as after qualifying yet again on pole, Pecco would end up being in an intense fight for the win with Enea Bastianini, with Enea overtaking Pecco at turn 7 with 7 laps to go. Pecco would re-overtake Enea a couple of corners later, but approaching turn 6, Pecco would run deep into the corner, allowing Enea back through. And then, to add insult to injury, Pecco, whilst trying to catch back up, would crash out at the penultimate corner, ending his race in the process and wrecking any chance he had on gaining ground to Fabio. Pecco would then bounce back at his home race in Mugello, taking victory after an amazing charge through the field following a rain-affected qualifying session, but would then come crashing down to earth again at the following race at Barcelona, where he would get taken out on the first lap by the LCR Honda of Taka Nakagami, who was lucky not to sustain a head injury after his head clipped the rear of Pecco's bike. Then it would be made worse at the next race at the Sachsenring, as after qualifying once again on pole position, Pecco would get jumped at the start by his title rival Quartararo, and would also nearly get jumped by his other rival Aleix. Pecco would try to re-overtake Fabio on the next lap, but would run deep, allowing Fabio to do the switchback and regain the lead. Then, 2 laps later, Pecco, who was pushing hard to keep up with Fabio, would lose the front end at the exit of turn 1 and fall off his bike, ending his race for the second race in a row. Many people at this point had already written Pecco off for winning the title, as after the German Grand Prix and with Fabio winning the previous 2 races, Pecco found himself down in 6th in the standings and a massive 91 points behind championship leader Fabio Quartararo. Despite having the speed to challenge at the front and win races, Pecco throughout the year was criticised for his inconsistencies, with many calling him a bottle job, as well as saying that he was a massive downgrade compared to Andrea Dovizioso, the man who was previously at Ducati before leaving the team at the end of 2020 in a messy divorce. Many also believed that he wasn't championship material, and believed that if Enea Bastianini, who was having an amazing season on the Gresini, was on that factory bike, he would easily win the title and put up a fight against Fabio and Aleix, who many believe were the only title contenders after Germany. But despite being 91 points behind, Pecco was not going to give up, and would end up using the criticism as fuel to shift the momentum in his favour. At the next race at Assen, Pecco would take his 4th pole of the season and would convert the pole into the win, beating fellow VR46 Academy rider Marco Bezzecchi by 0.4 of a second in a race that saw both Fabio Quartararo and Aleix Espargaro tangle on the first lap, with Fabio crashing out later on in the race and Aleix recovering to 4th. This saw Pecco move up to 4th in the standings and reduce the gap to Fabio to 66 points. Then, after the summer break, Pecco would go on a tear, winning at Silverstone and the Red Bull Ring, before winning at Misano after a close fight with future teammate Bastianini, who at this point had already been confirmed to be Pecco's new teammate for 2023. During those 3 races, Fabio would begin to struggle, as apart from Austria where he finished 2nd, Fabio would record an 8th place finish at Silverstone due to a lack of pace and also having to serve a long lap due to causing the incident with Aleix at Assen, and would finish 5th at Misano, being beaten to 4th by the VR46 Ducati of Luca Marini, half-brother of Valentino Rossi. In these 3 races, Pecco would move up to 2nd in the standings, and after being 91 points behind, he had managed to slash that to just 30 points, just over a win behind Fabio, with Aleix starting to drift away from the title fight. Then, at Motorland Aragon, the championship would take a dramatic twist. In qualifying, Pecco would once again grab pole position, whilst rival Quartararo qualified a row behind in 6th. Then, at the start, Fabio would lose a place to the fast-starting Marquez, and then, whilst trying to re-overtake him at turn 3, Fabio would collide with the rear of Mark's Honda, losing control of his bike and falling off into retirement, putting a huge dent in his championship lead, as with Pecco finishing second after just missing out on the win to Enea Bastianini after another amazing scrap between the pair of them. Pecco had now reduced the gap in the standings to just 10 points, putting him within touching distance of Fabio. Suddenly, the perspective on Pecco had started to change, and with the momentum shifting in Ducati's favour and with Yamaha going backwards in performance, Pecco went from being written off by many people to now being the favourite to win the title. Pecco would crash out at the next race at Motegi whilst fighting for position with Fabio, but luckily for Pecco, he would only lose a bit of ground in the standings, with Fabio only managing to finish in 8th, only being able to open up the lead to 18 points. Then at Buriram, which was affected by rain, Pecco would once again take a huge bite out of Fabio's lead, as despite having a reputation for struggling in wet conditions, Pecco would produce a mature ride to finish 3rd behind Miller and Oliveira, whilst Fabio would have a nightmare race, finishing down in 17th as a result of his Yamaha not suiting the wet conditions, and this would be compounded even further at the next race at Phillip Island, where Fabio would crash out of the race after losing the front end at turn 2. This crash would end up being significant, as with Pecco finishing 3rd after being in a close fight for the win with Marc Marquez and eventual winner Alex Rins, Pecco now took the lead in the standings for the first ever time in his career, leading Fabio by 14 points. In the space of 8 races, Pecco had gone from being 91 points down to now having a 14-point lead in the standings. It was an incredible turnaround, and if he could go all the way and win it, it would undoubtedly be the greatest comeback in motorsport history. At the next race at Sepang, Pecco would ensure that he would be one step closer to the title, as after qualifying down in 9th, Pecco would charge his way through the order, and after another great fight with Enea Bastianini, would come through to take his 7th win of the season to essentially put one hand on the trophy and increase his lead to 23 points thanks to Fabio finishing 3rd. With the points gap that Pecco had to Fabio, Pecco just needed to ride a cautious race at Valencia and finish within the top 14 should Fabio win to grab his first ever Premier Class title. And at Valencia, although Fabio would finish ahead of Pecco, it would not be enough for the Frenchman to clinch the title, as with Fabio finishing in 4th, Pecco cruised home to finish in 9th to become the MotoGP World Champion of 2022. After being ruled out after the German Grand Prix, Pecco went on a tear in the second half of the season and turned a 91-point deficit into a 17-point lead come the final standings. Pecco became the 4th different champion in 4 years and ensured that it was a 4th different manufacturer that won in 4 years as well. Ducati from this point on would become a dominant force in MotoGP, with their satellite teams, most notably Pramac, being allowed to also compete for the title. Pecco would retain the title in 2023 after a close fight with Jorge Martin, and he is once again competing for the title this year, only this time hunting Martin down instead of being the hunted. Personally speaking, as a neutral, I hope Martin wins the title, mainly because I want to see the number 1 on an Aprilia next year, but also because I want to see a satellite win the title, as I do have a video idea in mind if that happens. But I've jinxed it now I've said that. But either way, even if Pecco does win his 3rd Premier Class title this year, it will be nothing compared to the first one, as after being called a bottle job and also a downgrade compared to Dovi, he ended up proving these people wrong and ended up producing what is, in my opinion, the greatest comeback in motorsport history, and I don't think we'll see anything of the like ever again.